Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. I know everybody's attention right now is drawn to the NFL as the start of free agency. Well, I think it officially starts tomorrow, but the illegal or legal tampering period, I should say, started yesterday. And there's a flurry of activity going on in the National Football League while the Patriots seem to be asleep at the wheel. That's another topic for another day, Sap. I'm sure our boss Ian Glendon, is apoplectic about what's going on with the Patriots, as am I. And your guy Aaron Rodgers might run for vice president, so who the hell knows what's going on in the football world? We don't have to pay attention to that right now, Sap. We can turn our focus to the sport that's actually in season right now, in the sport that we cover, which is basketball and the National Basketball Association. We've talked a lot about the Boston Celtics. I know this year because, well, one, we're based in Boston. Two, I'm a huge Celtics fan, and three, they've been running away with the best record in basketball. But they have hit a blip this past week. Sap lost to the Cleveland Cavaliers, where they blew a 22-point lead in the fourth quarter, and they followed that up with a loss to the Denver Nuggets, making them 0-2 against the Nuggets on their season series. And then they followed up with a I'd say a not super impressive, but still got the job done performance against the Phoenix Suns. And then last night they obliterated the terrible Portland Trailblazers. So a weird week for the Celtics, Sap. And so I think what we should talk about is where do we see them now after we've seen this week versus the past couple of weeks where we've been talking about them as sort of a juggernaut team?
Well, they're 50-14, clearly the best record, not just in the Eastern Conference, but in all of basketball. Unless they collapse, they'll be the number one seed in the East. They'll have the best record in the NBA, giving them home court advantage throughout the playoffs. So when a team is that good and expected to at least get to the finals and perhaps win the championship, and we've both been on board, Jet, that it's championship or bust. I mean, you can't just get to the finals and lose again like they did 2 years ago, because that to me would be an unsuccessful season. So you comb through some of these games and look for some negatives. Now, if we look quickly at the Cleveland game, you had a 22-point lead with 9 minutes left. Cleveland didn't have their best player, Donovan Mitchell. Evan Mobley gets hurt during the game. I want to ask you this as a Celtics fan. The Celtics were outscored 34-11 over the final 9 minutes of that game. A 22-point lead turned into a 1-point loss. What's more alarming, that they gave up 34 points in 9 minutes or that they scored only 11 points in 9 minutes?
I think the scoring, because the defense, that's an effort thing, and that's frustrating. But you would think that if the stakes meant more and if it was a playoff game, they'd be able to rectify that with just some simple effort and concentration, because it's a game, you can't give away a playoff game, though this team has done that before. The scoring thing, it to me is a little bit more alarming, Sap, because you have so many weapons on this team. It seems like, how is it possible that you could only score that many points in a quarter when you have, we've talked about this before, five guys that can create their own shot in the starting lineup, and then you have somebody else like Al Horford coming off the bench who could score, Peyton Pritchard, Sam Hauser, who's on a fantastic streak right now. The fact that you could only muster, what did you say, 11 points, Sap, in that quarter is just, I don't understand how that happens. That to me is a little bit more alarming.
So they're up 16 going into the quarter. They score the first 6 points of the quarter. They're up 22. And from that point forward, the final 9 minutes, they score 11 points. Jason Tatum goes 1 for 9 from the floor in the fourth quarter, which leads to the one problem this team has, is winning close games. So far this season, with an opportunity to tie or take the lead in regulation or in overtime with 10 seconds or less in these situations, the
Right.
Celtics are 1 of 11 from the floor. So let me just say that in English so everyone can understand. So far this season, with an opportunity to tie or take the lead at the end of regulation or in overtime with less than 10 seconds left in either situation, the Celtics are 1 of 11 from the floor. That
It's
doesn't
awful.
even seem possible, right? Because you've got Tatum, you've got Brown, Porzingis, White, Holiday. If somebody's off a given night, you have Al Horford. You should have options to be more efficient in those situations. And it just seems to me that they don't really have any structure in those situations. Like against Cleveland, what do? They're down one. They don't call a timeout. They give the ball to Jason Tatum. He ends up taking, an 18-foot fall away over a 6'2" guard. He should take Darius Garland to the basket. He's bigger and stronger than him. Maybe get to the free throw line. Instead, it's a fadeaway from 18 feet. Tatum 6'9", Garland 6'2". They don't seem to really have any kind of structure down the stretch. Now, it doesn't always have to be Jason Tatum taking that last shot. You can
Yeah,
run your offense through him, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be just Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. Like, give Porzingis a chance, or Holiday, or White. They're obviously very, very good NBA players.
yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that, Sap, because this is a problem I had going back to the Doc Rivers, Paul Pierce days, where at the end of games, and Paul Pierce was much more efficient at the end of games than Jason Tatum has been. And Paul Pierce was a clutch player. I'm not trying to knock him, but still, the play that the Celtics always ran was an isolation to Paul Pierce, and he would try to take a fadeaway shot over his lone defender. They try to do the same thing with Jason Tatum. It's predictable. It doesn't work. And the Celtics are too good to just be relying on one play at the end of games. So it's really frustrating. I don't know why you score so efficiently. You have this historic offense this year in terms of efficiency and all these other analytics and points per game, everything like that. And when it comes to crunch time in games, you suddenly can't figure out why you were scoring so many points, the prior 47 minutes of a game. That doesn't make any sense to me. Why do you suddenly abandon everything that was working for you and go into this ISO one-on-one ball and hope that Jason Tatum hits a tough fadeaway shot? That doesn't make any sense. You're too skilled to be able to rely on just that. Just like the Celtics when they had Paul Pierce, they had plenty of other options. One of my favorite, most memorable game winners that the Celtics have ever had, Sap, was in the playoffs against the Orlando Magic. And I think the Magic thought that they were just going to go to the traditional Paul Pierce play, and they drew up a play for Big Baby Davis to hit a game-winning shot in the playoffs against the
Mm-hmm.
Orlando Magic. When you do something over and over and over again, teams start to catch on to that. This isn't intramural basketball. This is the NBA. And if you're doing something over and over and over again and it's not working and other teams are catching it onto it, then you have no one to blame but yourself. So I fault Joe Mazzulla and the coaching staff. I fault Jason Tatum for not saying, no, let's run the offense through me instead of taking a tough shot. I don't understand how we've gone this far into the season and this far into this core group of guys, and they still are relying on this same last second play over and over and over again.
The other thing too is they don't play a lot of close games. They're beating their opponents by an average of 11 points per game, many blowouts. So they don't have a lot of experience in close games, but they have to be better at the end of these games. And I'll go back to the 1993 NBA final because I'm the old guy here on the podcast. You were probably 4 years old at the time.
I
You may
was,
not
yep.
remember this, right? So we're talking the Phoenix Suns and the Chicago Bulls, game 6 of the NBA finals. Phoenix is up a point with about 5 seconds left. Chicago calls a timeout. They diagram a play. Everyone just expects Michael Jordan to take the last shot. Well, Jordan got the ball to Pippen, who got it to Horace Grant, who got it to John Paxson, who nailed the game-winning shot. Like, that obviously shocked the viewing audience and probably shocked the Phoenix Suns as well. Paxson was an accomplished shooter, was wide open, drained it. Bulls win the game, wrap up the series in 6 games. You can't just go to the same guy every single time, especially when you have other options. And the Celtics have plenty of those options, whether it's Jaylen Brown, who at times can't create his own shot because he's not really a good passer and he has a questionable left hand. We get that. But what's wrong with good ball movement and getting the ball to a wide open Drew Holiday, who's an experienced player, or Derek White? On that particular play, Tatum started to feel the double team. He could have kicked it out to White for an open shot. What's wrong with that? Instead, he takes a fadeaway from 18 feet, comes up short. Porzingis tips it in, but it's most likely after the buzzer. There was a foul called. It was overturned, and
It was
it
not
was
a good,
kind of
well
a mess.
officiated last sequence, but the
No,
Celtics on the Celtics too. You can't. And Sap, part of it too is Tatum walked the ball up the court, and
exactly.
say what you want about Joe Mazzulla's timeouts at the end of the game, which I think is horrible. He's terrible at it. But there was enough time where like they didn't necessarily need it. But once you start walking the ball up the court, the other team knows exactly what you're doing. Tatum was saying, basically announcing with he might as well put it on the jumbotron. I'm taking the last shot here. It makes no
Yeah,
sense. And so, especially when you're losing the game, I hate that. You need to have. I know if it's a 1 point game or one possession game or whatever, but Sap, when you're down, you still need to have some sense of urgency. You can't just say,
sure.
"Well, we're going to take this last shot. We hit it. We don't." Because at that point, if you had gone a little faster and you had taken a shot and you had missed it, well, at least then you could still foul and live to play another day, try to shoot a three if they make both their free throws and go into overtime. Like, it's just so stupid to me to hold it for the last shot. You're not giving yourself the best chance to win a game that way.
You want to lengthen the game at that point, right? Extra possessions. And Cleveland doesn't have its best player in Donovan Mitchell. Sure, if you miss that shot and Mitchell ends up with the rebound or ends up with the ball, he gets fouled. He's going to nail those 2 free throws. He was out that night. So
And
that
then you're
wasn't even
still
an
down by
option for
3,
Cleveland.
Sap. So that's not a huge deal. It's still a 1-possession game.
Yeah, you set up a 3 to try to tie it and get it into overtime. I mean, the problem is blowing a 22-point lead in the final 9 minutes. You should have never gotten to that
Of
point where
course.
it was a 1-possession game inside of the final 30 seconds. But by the time you get there, you have to at least rectify whatever issues you've had. So that's one problem I see with the Celtics going forward, because they don't play a lot of close games. And in those close games, especially against quality opponents, they're not really good at it. So that's obviously a concern. I don't know how you fix it. I think, like you said, Jet, you've got to be a little bit more urgent on offense and just don't be so predictable that everyone in the stands, including the people on the court for the opposing team, know that Jason Tatum's taking a shot. And then at 6'9", 235, being guarded by what? A 6'2", 190-pound guard? What are you taking a fadeaway for? Go to the basket. You're big and strong. If you get fouled, you go to the free throw line to give your team a lead. If you hit 2 free throws, what's wrong with that? He's an outstanding free throw shooter. It's not like Jaylen Brown, who I think at times maybe loses a little aggressiveness because he's not a really great free throw shooter, although the night he took 14 free throws and only hit 7, he continued to attack. So those are some issues that you have to look at with the Celtics going forward. Again, we're being very picky here, but when you're the best team in basketball and the hopes are you win the championship, you've got to comb through these issues going forward, because there's only 5 weeks left in the regular season, and then we start for real the end of April.
Yeah, Jaylen Brown, that's his free throw shooting. That's something else I wanted to mention, Sap, in that it's hovering at that 70% mark and below. He should be a way better free throw shooter than that. That's not good enough, and that's not going to get it done. He's been past 2 months, he's been shooting awful from the free throw line. That could come back to bite them in a big way in the playoffs. He should be much closer to 80 than to 60. That's not okay where he is right now. That needs to improve. And a slight concern I have too, Sap, over this past 4 games, this West Coast strip, or this, I mean, I guess Cleveland's on the West Coast, but other than that, Jason Tatum, who's been very efficient this season, the past 4 games has not been efficient at all, Sap. His past 4 games, 8 of 21 from the floor. That was the loss to Cleveland where he was horrible. 5 of 13 against Denver. She should be taking more than 13 shots, by the way, against Denver. 11 of 28 against Phoenix. 9 of 23 last night against Portland. He has not shot the ball well, Sap. I don't know if it's fatigue at this point, but or something, or a nagging injury, but they need to figure that out, because if Jason Tatum is playing in the playoffs like he has the past 4 games at that level of efficiency, they're not going to reach the championship, let alone win it.
No, and just last night in that win over Portland, look, they sailed to victory. They won by 22 points against one of the worst teams in basketball. Jaylen Brown had 27 points. Jason Tatum had 26. So they combined for 53 points on 52 shots. That's not efficient enough. Those last 4 games, Tatum's shooting around 35% from the floor. Again, too many threes. Brown and Tatum combined for what, 3 of 16 from 3 last night against Portland. Again, you win by 22, so sometimes you don't really look at these ugly numbers, but neither one of these guys are really good 3-point shooters, yet they're taking a lot of threes. Obviously, that comes from the top down, where there's Brad Stevens, who runs basketball operations, has done a fantastic job putting together this roster, and it filters down to Joe Mazzulla, where it's like they're adamant about taking 3-point shots, and it gets them out of some sort of rhythm. Look, the Denver Nuggets won a championship last year as an efficient 3-point shooting team, but they didn't live or die with the 3-point shot. They won 1 game in the finals last year, hitting 5 3-pointers. Now, they're a different animal because they have the best player in the league, who also happens to be the best passer in the league at this point, who happens to also be the best rebounder in the league, and Nikola Jokic, who also happens to be the most efficient shooter in the league. Like, I keep thinking of Nikola Jokic, and I can't really recall anybody who was quite like him. Like,
No,
look,
not really.
there's been some comparisons to Larry Bird.
He's
Bird
taller.
was a phenomenal. He's taller. Bird was a great rebounder. This guy appears to be a slightly better rebounder.
He's better
Bird was a great passer. Pick whichever one he thinks a better passer. They were both phenomenal. Bird had better players to play with. I mean, it was maybe easier to accumulate assists when you're dumping it into McHale or Robert Parrish, and you got DJ as a Hall of Famer working with you as well. This guy is incredible, and
Yeah.
again, that's the issue. You get to the finals if you're the Celtics and you're staring at him, and he's 2-0 against you this year, and no team in the league has a matchup against Jokic, with the exception of one. That's the Philadelphia 76ers, and Joel Embiid tends to outplay Jokic when they go head-to-head, but there's no chance the 76ers are getting to the finals this year,
No.
especially if Embiid doesn't play. They have no chance. Even if he plays, I don't think they really have a chance. So good luck to beating that guy in a 7-game series, because he's just toying with the league at this point.
Yeah, that's definitely a daunting task. I think for the entire league, like you said, it's not just for the Celtics. They're going to be a hard matchup. They'll be a very hard out. The big advantage the Celtics would have against Denver is they should, barring a collapse, finish with home court advantage. So they'll only have to play in a 7-game series, 3 games at altitude, and then if they do what they've done the regular season to protect their home court extremely well, then they should win that final series. But yeah, it's a daunting task. One last note, Sap, I want to have about Jason Tatum before we move on too is just looking at the numbers in terms of his shooting percentage. From February 1st to that Cleveland Cavaliers loss, he only had 2 games where he shot below 45% from the floor, and he's done that now 4 games in a row where he's shot below 40%. So that indicates to me that there's, like I said, either some injury or some fatigue. That seems weird to be in that type of shooting slump after being hot all season long. So I would be slightly concerned about that if I was the Celtics. I would say, hey, Jason, everything feeling okay? Do you want to take a game or 2 off? Like, you've played. Because we've lauded him for this before. He doesn't take games off, and maybe he needs to before the playoffs. Sap.
I always look at Jason Tatum more as a scorer than a shooter. Right? There's only a few guys in the league who are both. Like Kevin Durant's a great shooter and a great scorer. Steph Curry's more of a great shooter than a scorer. Tatum to me is more of a scorer than a shooter. Like he can run hot and cold, especially from 3. So he's going to have some slumps. And it just seems like these 4 games have happened after there was a lot of talk about Jason Tatum being MVP of the league. And we
Yeah.
talked about it a couple of weeks ago. We said right now he's second or third behind Jokic and maybe SGA. You throw Luka Doncic into the discussion as well as Giannis. Like those are the 5 players we talked about. But Tatum was right in the mix. Although I think Jokic is going to win this award. If he doesn't, they should investigate the voters, because what the guy's doing out there on a nightly basis is absurd. But we talked about Tatum being a real MVP candidate. In the last 4 games, he's certainly taken his name out of contention for that, because he was not good against Cleveland in a national TV game. He was, quite frankly, like absent against Denver. He was on the court, but he wasn't engaged against Denver. And then he had a poor shooting night against Phoenix in another national game. So I think he's completely out of the race now for MVP. It's Jokic to lose. But yeah, those are concerns with Jason Tatum. This has happened before. We saw 2 years ago against Golden State in the finals. He was not the same player. Wasn't quite the same player against Miami last year in the conference finals. Maybe it's fatigue. Maybe it's an injury. He's always shaking that left wrist.
Yeah.
That has been a problem for the last 3 seasons. So yeah, get him as much rest as necessary. Forget trying to appease him and put up numbers to make him an MVP candidate, because he no longer is. Just worry about some load management, give him some time off, so when you get to the postseason, you're as healthy as you can be. And also, it's imperative for the Celtics, especially in the first 2 rounds, get through those rounds quickly. If you need more than 10 games to get through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, that could be an issue, because last year we saw they needed 13 games to get through the first 2 rounds of the playoffs. And quite frankly, they didn't have a lot left at the end of that Miami series, especially in Game 7.
That's true. And then looking at the rest of the Celtics schedule this season, Sap, there should be plenty of opportunity to find a couple games for Jason Tatum to get rest. They play Washington 2 more times. They play Detroit 2 more times. They play Atlanta twice. Portland again. They're playing some pretty Charlotte. They're playing some pretty bad teams that you should be able to say, okay, we can win this without you, Jason, tonight. Get some rest
Mm-hmm.
before the playoffs. That's what it looks like for the Celtics. It's definitely been an interesting week trying to sort of evaluate where they are right now. Though they still obviously have the massive lead in terms of the standings. And then if you look ahead to the Western Conference, so we've been talking about this for the past couple of weeks, Sap, not necessarily the top, which is very bunched together as well, at least the top 3 seeds in the West. Oklahoma City currently at number one, just half a game up on the Nuggets and a game and a half up on the injured Timberwolves. The play-in tournament right now, as it stands, is fascinating. At the 7th seed is Sacramento at 36-27. Then the Dallas Mavericks at 37-28, followed by the Lakers at 36-30, and the Warriors at 34-30. And Sacramento is just a game back of Phoenix. So we could be looking at a Phoenix, Dallas, LA, Golden State play-in tournament, Sap, which would be by far the most star-studded play-in tournament that we've had yet, and would have some huge implications on, legacies of players. And it's crazy to think that Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Steph Curry are all in the play-in tournament.
Yeah, we're talking about what, 8 to 10 Hall of Famers playing in a play-in tournament.
Yeah.
And two of those teams would be eliminated quickly.
Yep.
So you could have Phoenix playing Dallas in the 7-8 game. The winner advances as the 7 seed. And then you could have the Lakers playing Golden State in the 9-10 matchup. The winner of that would then play the loser of 7-8 to become the 8 seed. That would be incredible, because you look at the rest of the Western Conference, and we've talked about how 4 teams have kind of separated themselves from everyone else: Denver, Oklahoma City, Minnesota, the Clippers. Minnesota's struggling a little bit because Karl Anthony Towns is out now, maybe until the playoffs. The Clippers have leveled off a little bit. Sacramento's been a surprise team this year. I didn't expect them to continue to play at the level they did last year. They're close to being probably a 48-win team, which is pretty impressive in the Western Conference. And to me, the biggest surprise in the West might be New Orleans. They're on pace to win 50
no one talks
games.
about them. No one
No
talks
one
about
talks
them.
about them. It's like New Orleans in the West and Cleveland in the East. No one ever talks about them. I mean, Cleveland did beat the Celtics without Donovan Mitchell,
Yeah.
and then losing Evan Mobley in that game. And they beat the Celtics 3 out of 4 last year. And if they're healthy, they're a tough out. But no one talks about those two teams. So that play-in tournament would be fascinating, really. I mean, we started a couple of years ago when Golden State played the Lakers in a play-in. The Lakers won, became the 7 seed, ended up losing to Phoenix with Chris Paul in the first round of the playoffs. And then Golden State lost to Memphis. Remember, Ja Morant had a huge game against Golden State. So you do see some fascinating games in the play-in tournament. And at first, I was kind of pushing back against the play-in tournament, but now I think it's a wild success. It really is, because it keeps more teams alive, and those winner go-home games are really, really exciting.
Yeah, it really is. I think it is, just a great idea to combat tanking as much as possible in the NBA. And I actually, this year, I think some of the bottom teams are just bad. I don't think there's no one to really tank for this year. So we're just seeing some bad teams. But in terms of what it looks like for the play-in, yeah, I mean, it should be awesome. And these are going to be the teams that are in it, Sap. It's going to be some combination of Phoenix, Sacramento, Dallas, LA, and Golden State. Houston is, I don't think, going to be able to sneak back into this thing, nor Utah. And really the race is going to be between, trying to stay out of that play-in and get to that 6 seed spot, Sap. To stay safe and avoid that. That's going to be a really interesting race down the stretch. For Golden State and LA, they are coming awfully close to being out of that race too. So they're going to have to play some really, really good basketball and hope Phoenix and Sacramento and Dallas level off significantly in order to avoid the play-in tournament. Because right now, the Lakers are 2.5 games out of being in that 6 seed. And the Warriors are 3.5 games out of being in that 6 seed. So it wouldn't be easy. And plus, Phoenix has been playing without Devin Booker, and so when he gets back, you'd imagine they'd be better off too. So I would think that this is probably what it's going to look like today. Sap is probably what it's going to look like at the end of the season. In some order: Sacramento, Dallas, LA, and Golden State in that play-in tournament.
Yeah, it's tough to jump many teams at this point because they're all kind of playing each other. And you have to factor in travel and load management, especially with the Lakers with LeBron and Anthony Davis. The Lakers' ceiling is still very high to me. I think they could beat any team in the Western Conference.
Well, when Anthony Davis plays like he did the other night, I mean, he had just an unbelievably, like a historic game, Sap. When he plays at that level, yeah, they can beat anybody, sure.
Sure, with the exception of Denver. Because I don't think they match up with Denver at all. And every time the Lakers play Denver, it's a game for 44 minutes. And then the final 4 minutes, it's not a game and Denver wins. And I'm still amazed that no team in the league, or especially a contending team in the league, hasn't kind of reached out to Dwight Howard to come in as a backup center,
He
because
just
Dwight
must be a
Howard seemed to.
pain in the ass. That must be it,
Well,
right?
who's a pain in the ass to is Nikola Jokic. You remember in the bubble 4 years ago, he was in Jokic's head. Like, Jokic does not like playing against him.
Then the
But
Celtics should
again,
call him.
someone should call him, and just maybe don't even play him until you play Denver, and then put him in there for 10 minutes a night just to irritate Nikola Jokic and get him out of his game. Although I think Jokic at this point is so secure in himself and so confident in his game that he's at the point now. I don't think anybody's going to irritate him. He's just playing at such a high level. But that was the one guy I do remember from the bubble who just got in Jokic's head and got him out of sorts, and the Lakers were able to win that series and go on and win the championship. But yeah, what did Davis have the other night? 25 points, 27 rebounds.
Other way around. 27 points, 25 rebounds, 5
Right.
assists, 7 steals, 3 blocks, and
It
was
was like a Wilt Chamberlain game.
yeah, absurd game.
Yeah.
And he didn't even lead his team in plus minus that night somehow. D'Angelo Russell did, who also has been playing very well recently. The Lakers starting five, Sap, is good. It's their bench. Their bench sucks. Their bench is awful.
It really is. Yeah, the starting five can go head to head. And again, that might explain why they play Denver tough for 42, 44 minutes, and then they have nothing left at the end of the game. And that's kind of what happened last year in the postseason. They won 2 series, and then they had nothing left against Denver late in those games, got swept. And again, the difference last year is the Lakers had to play really good basketball the final 2 months just to get in the play-in tournament. They're going to be in the play-in tournament this time. It's just a matter of, are they going to be 8, 9, 10? Where are they going to fall? Obviously, they'd like to get to 6 so they don't have to go through the play-in tournament. But then you're going to have to also see what happens with the top 3 teams in the conference. Like, I would think Denver will be either the number 1 seed or the number 2 seed. As much as I love Minnesota, not having Karl-Anthony Towns for the next month,
killer.
that is going to hurt them. So they'll probably fall to the 3rd or 4th with the Clippers. So, your reward for winning the play-in tournament as the 7 or 8 seed is going to be a 50% chance of playing the Denver Nuggets. Right. Good luck with that.
Yeah, the Lakers can't beat them. I agree with you. But I think if it was Lakers Thunder in the first round, I kind of think the Lakers might be favored in that series. As strange as that sounds, Sap.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, SGA could go off and score 35 a night, but, LeBron's going to be a tough matchup against.
And they have
Oklahoma
no experience.
City.
That's the thing. You're talking about a team in the Lakers that has the guy who has the most playoff. And LeBron has more playoff experience than most of the league combined.
Most organizations, yeah.
And certainly more than the Thunder, who have, I think, just Gordon Hayward, who's played in the playoff series. So, I mean, certainly you can't count the Lakers out in that series. But yeah, against the Nuggets, no, it's not going to happen. Sap, as a LeBron guy and a Lakers guy in this play-in tournament scenario, as it stands right now, of those other 3 teams, Dallas, Sacramento, and Golden State, I'm assuming you'd most like to play Sacramento in a 1-game elimination game?
Sure. Yeah, as good as De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis are, Sabonis actually leads the league in triple-doubles, or he's right there with
Jokic. Yes, triple and double-doubles. He leads the league in both of those things.
He's kind of like the poor man's Jokic, right? I mean, he does everything on the basketball court, just not quite at the level of Nikola Jokic. But I would think Sacramento, just because of experience, although Sacramento did make it to the playoffs last year, lost in the first round to Golden State, played them tough, lost in 7 games. But again, I think the Lakers would have problems with De'Aaron Fox because he's so athletic, and the Lakers aren't the most athletic team. But just experience could kind of shine through, and that would be maybe the best team for the Lakers to face. You're playing Dallas, if Kyrie has a huge night. Look, Luka Doncic, what did he have, 4 straight triple-doubles where he scored 35 more points in each game? I mean, he's just putting up ridiculous numbers. Phoenix with Durant's always the tough out, and Golden State with Curry. I mean, that play-in tournament is going to be so unpredictable. Those 4 teams that make it, if it's, say, Phoenix, Dallas, Lakers, Golden State, because of the great players on those 4 teams, that feels like that should be the second round of the playoffs, let alone the play-in.
It really does, yeah. Another, before we move on to it, I was looking at this too. Another issue for the Lakers, not to rag on the Lakers, but also I enjoy doing that. They suck on the road, 12-19. They are not a good road team at all.
Which makes no sense because you have veterans.
Right.
Like, how many big games has LeBron won on the road in the playoffs? Like, we can't even count that high. Anthony Davis, I don't think, is intimidated by the road. Maybe the secondary players are. Maybe you have to look at the road home splits of D'Angelo Russell,
They're
who
the
is
only
kind of like the X factor.
they're the only non-Western Conference play. They're the only playoff team right now in the Western Conference who has a non-500 or better record on the road.
And they're not even close, 12 and 19. I mean, if
No,
at that point, if they were like 15 and 16, you'd say, okay, they could get hot down the stretch and end up with a winning record on the road. Strange thing is, last year they were pretty good on the road. So what's the difference? It's just, who
I
knows
don't
with
know.
some of those things sometimes. Again, D'Angelo Russell seems to be the guy that when he's playing at a high level, they're tough to beat. But then there's other nights where he's D'Angelo Russell.
And the Warriors are better on the road than they are at home this year. Go figure that one out. They remember when they didn't lose a home game for like 2 years, and now they're
Well,
better on
they
the.
had Kevin Durant on that team. They didn't lose many games at all for 2 years.
But that's yeah. It's interesting, and that field is going to be fascinating. It's certainly a lot more interesting than the Indiana Pacers, Miami Heat, Chicago Bulls, and Atlanta Hawks of the play-in tournament in the Eastern Conference. Though I'm sure Miami is not very happy with where they are right now, but we can talk about it on a later podcast. But before we wrap up, I do want to talk about, and Sap, you pointed this out to me too, because I completely forgot about it the other day because it lost in all this NFL news. The story with Rudy Gobert, who's already sort of persona non grata amongst NBA fans in the NBA for how he handled COVID and kind of looked like patient zero for a little while there. In fact, the anniversary of that I think was yesterday, Sap, the 4-year
Mm-hmm.
anniversary of that. Um, Now he's in trouble and got a massive fine for doing the money symbol to the referees in his game the other night. And essentially doubled down on it in his post-game press conference, talking about how the league is in bed with gambling now, which I mean is undeniable. They are, as are all the major sports leagues in North America, and insinuating strongly that the officials were on the take and that it had their calls were the result of gambling influence. Scott Foster was one of those officials, and he has been tied to that before, especially with the Tim Donaghy scandal. If you go back and watch the documentary that Netflix put out about Tim Donaghy, they talk about that extensively. The NBA cleared him. I think there's still a lot of questions around Scott Foster in regards to gambling and stuff like that are fair questions to ask. And this is just opens up a can of worms that the NBA does not want to be opened at all, Sap.
This is the thing that could ruin a sport, because sports is the best version of reality TV. And the appealing thing about sports is you don't know what's going to happen on a given night. So if there's some hesitancy on the part of fans to wager on the games and to be invested in the games, whether in person or on TV, that is going to cripple the sport. Now,
Right.
obviously, Rudy Gobert doesn't appear to have a filter like what he did at this press conference 4 years ago by grabbing all the recording devices and microphones and kind of, was trolling the whole idea that, oh, COVID's not a big deal. And then he was the first real athlete to test positive for COVID. We remember earlier in the year, he's in the middle of a kerfuffle with Draymond Green. He does seem to be in the middle of a lot of different things. He's tough to miss. I mean, there aren't a lot of 7'3" guys walking the face of the earth.
Yeah,
with
there
a
was
French
issues with him
accent.
and Donovan Mitchell too in Utah, if I'm
Right.
remembering correctly.
Yeah. Yep. Teammates that at some point have been close, but then after COVID, they kind of grew apart, and now neither one's in Utah. But I'm sure the fine is $100,000, which is nothing to someone who makes $45 million. But look, that's always in the back of fans' minds. Maybe not fans that are just fans that just enjoy the sport, but now that you have gambling involved, there are people out there that think NBA games are fixed, and that Scott Foster
Sure.
is the guy who's going to come in, and if it's 3-2 in a series, you bring him in,
Yeah,
and
it's the
you
worst kept
guarantee there's going to
secret.
be Game 7. Yeah,
Worst kept secret in the
it's just
NBA.
out there. Yeah, and look, you can really impact an NBA game or college basketball even more so as an official. You want to foul out the best player, you can be really, really forceful with that. Call
Sure.
some early fouls on whoever, and they're sent to the bench with 2 or 3 fouls, and they don't play till the second half. Give them a 4th foul in the third quarter, and that player might be useless the rest of the game. That's going to impact what goes on. You see the discrepancy in free throw attempts from
Oh
game
yeah.
to game. One team might take 37 free throws, the other one might take 11. That seems a bit abnormal. So yeah, this is always a concern and this is a growing league. Gambling is growing in all sports, so this is something that the league is going to have to monitor, especially with officials and players, because this is something that could ruin a sport.
Here's what Gobert said when he was asked to clarify. He said, I made some mistakes. I airballed a dunk. Mistakes happen. Referees make mistakes too, but sometimes I think it's more than mistakes. I think everyone that's in this league knows. I think it's got to get better. He said he had no problem being the bad guy again. That speaks what I think is the truth. I think that gambling is hurting our game. I know the betting and all that's becoming bigger and bigger, but it shouldn't feel that way, Gobert said. And as you mentioned, Zap, he was fined $100,000.
Isn't Scott Foster the official that every time he officiates Chris Paul
Yes.
loses? Right.
Yes.
Yeah, like Chris Paul had some record of like 2-16 in an 18-game stretch of games officiated by Scott Foster. Like that makes no sense. Like that's not a
Yes.
coincidence, right? That seems to be
His
some sort of
overall record
personal
is
vendetta.
Chris Paul is 3-17 dating back to 2008 when Scott Foster officiates games.
That's nuts. I mean, come on, Chris Paul, say whatever you want about him. I'm a fan of his and think he's a great player. Like he
Including
generally would
13
not go.
consecutive playoff losses.
Yeah, I mean, come on. That does sound a little bit fishy to say the least. I mean,
That
we know
seems
Tony Brothers.
impossible.
It seems, yeah. I mean, Chris Paul's
13
an
in a
all-time
row.
great player.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Tony Brothers had issues with the Celtics.
Yeah, Doc Rivers. Yep.
Yeah, without question. And then Joey Crawford with Tim Duncan of all people.
Yep,
I mean,
he
Tim
did.
Duncan never said a word.
To the point where
the
Joey
way it
Crawford
worked.
got suspended and taken off the officiating for the rest of the year because it was so bad. I mean, listen, they're humans. There's certain guys they like, certain guys they don't like.
Yeah.
Obviously, Scott Foster doesn't like Chris Paul, and Joey Crawford didn't like Tim Duncan.
No.
Which again seems very strange. Chris Paul, I get it because like everybody thinks he's kind of an annoying know-it-all a-hole. But Tim Duncan, I don't know, has ever said two words to an official. Maybe that's
he got
why
teed up. He got
maybe
teed
that's
up
what,
sitting on the bench.
right? Maybe that's why Joey Crawford didn't like him. He's like, why isn't this guy talking to me? I keep trying to
I don't
engage
trust
him in
him.
conversation.
Yeah, is he not like me? And it's just how Tim Duncan was. So these are things the league's going to have to make sure don't get too out of hand.
Yeah, and it's not just
Rudy
the
Gobert.
NBA. It's all the leagues now
it's
because
every
gambling.
sport.
It's jump the shark. They're in bed with all the gambling companies now. It is what it is, and it's fine. But you got to be on top of it, rigorously. Because if you find out that there's gambling, it'll screw it up for everybody. Everybody.
Yep, without question. So this is something that the leagues have to monitor, and they do with players. But the officials are the ones you got to watch as well. The players. Look, I think if a guy's making $25 million a year, I can't really see them fixing games. I think there's the potential of a problem in college, although now with NIL, they can make money as well. But I'm talking about like lower levels of college. I don't think
the
you're going to see Duke, North Carolina.
It's
but
a
then
big
the
issue for
officials
the
get
officials.
involved. It sure is.
I mean, they're not making, especially the college officials, they're not making squat.
No.
And the NBA officials make good money, but they don't make millions of dollars where they could on fixing games. They could make millions of dollars. So, there's a lot of money involved. And, whether as much fun as it is seeing like Gronk on DraftKings commercial, there's still a lot of criminal element to gambling. It's not just, Gronk commercials and stuff like that. But that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Check them out. Check out our social medias at JohnSap25, at Jet Strive. We'll be back with a new podcast very soon. So we'll talk to you all later. See you, everybody.